Most Americans don't think about Greenland. They barely think about Denmark. And if we're really being honest, half the country couldn't find the Arctic Circle on a map if you offered them season tickets to the Super Bowl. And that's exactly why this story matters. Because the most important geopolitical shifts never happen on the cable news. They happen quietly, in places nobody pays attention to, until suddenly everyone asks how they missed the warning signs. Greenland is one of those places. A frozen behemoth sitting on top of the world, ignored for decades, home to more ice than people, and yet right now, this island is becoming the center of a subtle but very real fracture between the United States and Europe. Now, that sounds dramatic until you zoom in. See, the Arctic isn't just a cold wasteland. It's the new battleground for resources, shipping lanes, rare earth minerals, missile warning systems, and strategic military positioning. And whoever controls the top of the world shapes what happens everywhere else. For years, the US and Europe pretended they were perfectly aligned up there. Shared values, NATO unity, stronger together political slogans. But here's the truth the State Department won't put in a press release. The US and Europe are not on the same page about Greenland. Not even close. Because Greenland isn't just geography, it's leverage. It's the place where American security meets European insecurity, where American ambition collides with European hesitation, where American military calculus runs into European domestic politics and environmental posturing. Greenland is where the alliance stops sounding like a friendship and starts looking like a chessboard. Now, let's rewind the clock for a moment because this didn't start yesterday. In 2019, when President Trump floated the idea of the United States buying Greenland, the media treated it like a punchline. Late night comedy fodder. Cable news giggled. Journalists tripping over themselves to sound clever. But beneath the memes and the mockery, the Pentagon wasn't laughing. NATO definitely wasn't laughing. China and Russia were not laughing. Greenland is the most strategically important piece of real estate in the Arctic. And the US wanting to buy it wasn't crazy. It was logical. Historical even. We've bought land before. Louisiana, Alaska, the Virgin Islands. Remember that? But this time, Europe panicked. Not because the idea was absurd, but because it revealed something very uncomfortable. The United States was thinking in terms of great power strategy. Well, it's about time to have that kind of thought process again. And Europe was thinking in terms of public relations. This was the first crack in the facade. Europe, especially Denmark, framed Greenland as a domestic issue. Culture, identity, self-governance, indigenous rights. Washington framed it as national security, early missile detection, Arctic dominance, and the future of global trade. Two friends, two completely different conversations happening at the same time. And that brings us to right now, where the fracture is no longer theoretical. Europe wants a co-governed Arctic future. The US wants strategic certainty. Europe wants climate diplomacy. The US wants military positioning. Europe wants distributed influence. The US wants dominance. Because unlike Europe, America actually has to defend the world when things go sideways. Let me say that again because it's the quiet truth nobody in Brussels likes to hear. The United States has global responsibilities. Europe has global opinions. And Greenland is the place where the contrast becomes undeniable. But here's where it gets interesting. This isn't just about Washington and Copenhagen. It's about Beijing and Moscow, the two players who love nothing more than cracks in Western unity. China has already spent years trying to get its claws into Greenland, rare earth mining, infrastructure deals, airport construction bids, all packaged in that soft focus economic development mask. Russia, they've been militarizing the Arctic for a decade. New bases, new icebreakers, new missile platforms. They're looking at Greenland the way a wolf looks at a wounded elk. And the US knows it, which is why Washington keeps pressing for deeper military access. expanded radar sites, more surveillance capability, and stronger presence around the Thule airbase. Europe, meanwhile, is split. Some want more US involvement because they know they can't defend the Arctic alone. Others want to balance American power because Europe never fully trusts a strong United States. Not militarily, not economically, and definitely not strategically. All alliances have expiration dates on the assumptions that hold them together. Let that sink in. All alliances have expiration dates on the assumptions that hold them together. After World War II, the assumption was simple. America defends Europe, and Europe follows America's lead on security. But today, Europe wants the protection without the posture, the guarantees without the investment, the umbrella without the storm. They want a safe Arctic without taking the risks necessary to secure it. Meanwhile, America sits there looking at Greenland, at the minerals, the shipping lanes, the choke points, the radar systems, and saying, we either secure this now or we deal with the consequences later. Europe isn't wrong to care about climate or cultural sovereignty, but America isn't wrong to care about deterrence. The problem is, both sides think they're talking about the same issue, and they're not. Europe thinks Greenland is a political territory. America knows Greenland is a strategic trigger point. Europe sees an island. America sees the 21st century equivalent of an unsinkable aircraft carrier sitting on the northern edge of the world. And the tension, polite on the surface, sharp underneath, is growing. Here's the last point in what I just spoke about. Great powers don't compete because they want to. They compete because the terrain forces their hand. And Greenland is the piece of terrain the United States cannot afford to lose influence over. Not to Europe, not to China, not to anyone. The fracture has already begun. Most people just haven't noticed it yet. Every major geopolitical conflict has a quiet phase, a part where nobody fires a shot, but everyone is maneuvering like the opening sequence of a chess match. That's where we are right now in the Arctic. People think the first move in a conflict is a missile strike. Wrong. The first move is the positioning. And Greenland is positioning. Not for a war next week, but for the world that's coming over the next 30 years. A world where the Arctic isn't a frozen wasteland, but a functioning highway for global commerce. Here's the part most Americans don't realize. The Arctic is melting faster than expected. And when ice melts, opportunity appears. New shipping routes, new resource corridors, new military access points, new choke points that matter more than the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, or Taiwan's waters. And whoever owns the pivot points owns the century. Greenland is one of those pivot points. This is why the United States is not interested in Greenland. The United States is strategically uncomfortable without Greenland. There's a difference. This is also why Europe, especially Denmark, is suddenly treating Greenland like a fragile heirloom instead of an overlooked outpost they underfunded for decades. But let's peel back the polite language and get straight to the truth. The Arctic is becoming the new global battleground, and America and Europe are quietly competing for influence while pretending they aren't. Now, before we get too deep into the weeds, here's the analytical anchor I want to tie it to. China has declared itself a near Arctic state. That's not satire. That's literally in their policy statements. They want access to Arctic shipping lanes because it cuts costs, reduce dependency on choke points like Malacca, and gives Beijing leverage in a world where every supply chain is becoming a weapon. Russia? Russia has the largest Arctic coastline on Earth and has already built more Arctic military infrastructure than every NATO country combined. Icebreakers, bases, missile systems, Arctic brigades. Moscow is treating the Arctic as the next frontier of survival. And caught between all of this, a massive island that belongs to Denmark, geographically sits next to America and strategically sits at the crossroads of the 21st century. This is where the US, Europe tensions become unavoidable. Europe wants Greenland to remain under the EU, NATO umbrella as collective stewardship. America wants Greenland positioned as a strategic anchor for missile warning, satellite tracking, and force projection. To a European diplomat, those words sound harsh. To an American combatant commander, those words sound like Tuesday. Europe is behaving like a landlord who hasn't visited the property in 20 years, suddenly shocked that the tenant wants to renovate the foundation before the house collapses. For decades, Denmark underinvested in Greenland's infrastructure, economy, and defense because it was expensive, politically irrelevant, and far away. Then suddenly the United States says, hey, the world is changing, Greenland is important now. And Denmark goes, oh, now it's important. Well, wait a minute. We don't want you getting too involved. And the US replies politely but firmly, with respect, if you won't secure it, we will. That's the friction. Let me put it more bluntly. The United States doesn't distrust Denmark. It distrusts Denmark's ability to stop China and Russia. Europe loves rules. America loves results. And in the Arctic, results matter more than rules. Because when China makes a move, they don't send a memo. When Russia builds a new base, they don't ask for permission. When the ice melts, the world doesn't wait for a European Commission working group. This brings us into the next layer. The real reason Europe is nervous. Europe is terrified, not that America wants Greenland, but that America might treat Europe as strategically optional. Here's the part that analysts whisper, but politicians don't dare touch. Greenland gives the US Arctic reach without European permission. Let that sink in. If America solidifies its presence in Greenland independently, the US can project missile defense across the Arctic. The US can dominate polar satellite tracking. The US can monitor Russian Northern Fleet movements. The US can patrol new shipping lanes. The US can influence rare earth mining. The US can intercept threats from the polar route faster than anywhere else, all without needing European infrastructure, European cooperation, or European political alignment. This terrifies Brussels, because a strong America is useful to Europe, but an independent America, an America that no longer needs constant European input, that's a nightmare scenario. Europe wants American power, but only when Europe gets a say in how the power is used. Greenland threatens that dynamic, which is why Europe has begun framing Greenland as a global commons issue. Climate, environment, indigenous rights, anything to put pressure on the US to share influence. And the US looks at that and goes, that's great, but also radar missiles, submarines, and mineral security. No animosity, just different world views. One sees Greenland as symbolism. The other sees Greenland as survival. Now let's zoom further into the US side just for a moment. American military planners don't think in election cycles. They think in decades. They think about missile trajectories, launch detection windows, nuclear response times, satellite coverage arcs, choke points, global trade patterns, future conflicts that haven't even entered the public imagination yet. To the Pentagon, Greenland isn't about 2025. It's about 2050, 2070, the next century, the one after that. Because the Arctic is a new high ground, and the high ground always wins. This is why America has been expanding investment in Thule Air Base, now Patuxent Space Base, deepening its pressure and signaling that Greenland matters more than ever. And here's the quiet part. If the US didn't take Greenland seriously, China would. Russia already does. Strategic vacuums do not remain empty. Someone fills them. Europe can't fill them, not militarily, not financially, not even politically. And Greenland knows it. Which is why Greenlandic leaders themselves have begun warning the US, not because they dislike Denmark, but because they understand geography better than European bureaucrats sitting in Brussels cafes. Greenland isn't looking south. Greenland is looking west, toward the superpower that actually has the capability to protect them. And that brings us to our pivot point, the psychology behind the geopolitical tension, the unspoken truth. Europe wants America as a partner. America wants Europe as an ally. But in the Arctic, America wants control. Not domination out of arrogance, control out of necessity. Because if something goes wrong up there, if Russia makes a move, if China inserts itself, If global shipping changes overnight, it's not Europe that will stabilize the situation. Guess who it is? America. And America knows this, which leads us to the cliffhanger, heading into the next section. The biggest threat to Western unity isn't Russia or China. It's the gap between how America sees the world and how Europe wishes the world worked. Here's the part nobody in Washington says in public, and nobody in Brussels even says in private. The US and Europe are drifting apart strategically, and Greenland is where that drift becomes undeniable. Not because anyone wants a breakup, not because NATO is collapsing, not because America suddenly dislikes Europe. No, it's something far simpler. Europe wants American protection without American posture. This is not news. America wants European partnership without European hesitancy. And the Arctic, specifically Greenland, is where those contradictions slam into each other. Let's start with the uncomfortable truth. The United States doesn't have the luxury of Europe's delusions. Europe still thinks geopolitics run on mood lighting and press conferences. They treat security like a panel discussion topic. America treats security like oxygen. It's either there or you're dead. Europe wants diplomacy. America wants deterrence. Europe wants consensus. America wants capability. Europe wants the Arctic to remain a pristine symbol of international harmony. America wants the Arctic to remain out of Chinese hands. These aren't philosophical disagreements. These are survival differences. Because here's the analytical spine of what we're about to cover next. Europe believes security is maintained by dialogue. America knows security is maintained by dominance. That word, dominance, terrifies Europe. It comforts the Pentagon. And that's why Europe panics at the idea of America deepening its grip on Greenland. Not because the US is untrustworthy, but because a confident, unrestrained America reminds Europe just how dependent it really is. Let me put it into plain Watchman language. Europe wants to feel like an equal, not a dependent, but it doesn't want to pay what equality costs. And nothing exposes that contradiction faster than Arctic strategy. You want brutal clarity? Here it is. Europe cannot defend Greenland. Europe cannot monitor the Arctic alone. Europe cannot keep Russia out. Europe cannot keep China from buying influence. Europe cannot project force without American aircraft, American satellites, American logistics, American intelligence, and American naval power. And Europe knows this. But knowledge and acceptance are two different things. So what does Europe do? It tries to negotiate relevance, not through strength, through narrative. Europe says things like, we must preserve the Arctic as a zone of peace. We must ensure climate responsibility in Greenland. We must engage indigenous voices to determine policy orientation. All noble, all important, all strategically irrelevant if China parks a research vessel that's actually a signals intelligence ship off Greenland's coast. This is the European paradox. Europe wants moral authority in a region where only hard power matters. And America, for all of its flaws, understands hard power. The American dilemma. How do you lead an alliance that doesn't want to be led? This is where the tension gets human. Because Americans and Europeans genuinely like each other. They share history, culture, values, movies, diplomacy, trade, everything. But liking each other has nothing to do with geopolitics. America sees danger coming long before Europe wakes up. Not because Americans are smarter, but because Americans are responsible for the consequences. Europe gets to debate threats. America has to respond to them. When China makes a move in the Arctic, the EU drafts a white paper. The US moves to destroyers. When Russia positions submarines near the Guyuk Gap, Europe convenes a working group. America repositions a bomber task force. It's not arrogance, it's called accountability. Because when you're the one holding the weight of global security, you don't have the luxury of wishful thinking. And Greenland is a weight-bearing column in that structure. So here's the Greenland question. Who gets to decide the future of strategic supernode? Europe thinks the answer is simple. Denmark and Greenland. America thinks the answer is equally simple. Whoever can protect it. And that's the dividing line. This tension isn't colonialism, it's realism. Because here's the truth. A region only belongs to the country that can keep it. If Russia expanded submarine patrols tomorrow, Europe couldn't stop it. If China tried to buy mining rights through a front company, Europe couldn't block it. If a geopolitical crisis erupted in the Arctic, Europe couldn't stabilize it. America could. Which means, whether anyone likes it or not, Greenland is functionally part of America's strategic perimeter. Not legally, not politically, but operationally. And operational reality always wins. What if America acts without consulting them? This is the tension no one admits. Europe is afraid of abandonment. If the US deepens its control of Greenland, if the US expands Arctic basing, if the US begins treating Greenland as a strategic anchor independent of EU influence, Europe loses its leverage. Because the Arctic would become another region, like the Middle East, like the Pacific, where Europe's opinions matter far less than its capabilities. And let's be honest, Europe's capabilities are shrinking. America's are growing. You can't negotiate from weakness. You negotiate from fear of what the stronger actor might do. And nothing frightens Europe more than the possibility that America may simply decide, well, we'll handle Greenland ourselves. Not hostile, not aggressive, just decisive. And decisiveness is terrifying to a continent built on committees. The irony, Greenland doesn't want to be caught between two parents divorcing. Greenland isn't a chess piece. It's not a resource depot. It's not a political talking point. It's a nation emerging, maturing, developing, trying to navigate a world where its value suddenly skyrocketed overnight. Greenland wants autonomy, respect, economic development, security, infrastructure, investment. But it also wants this, not to become the next Ukraine, the next South China Sea, or the next Kiel Canal, a flashpoint for powers that pretend to be friends while competing behind the scenes. Greenland likes Denmark. Greenland respects Europe, but Greenland needs America. And everyone in Greenland knows this. That's why the US is building consulates, funding projects, expanding radar systems, and embedding itself quietly in Greenlandic life. Not as an occupier, as a partner who actually has the ability to keep the lights on when the world gets dark. So here's the humorous side, but true analogy. Europe sees Greenland as an heirloom. America sees Greenland as body armor. You don't leave heirlooms on the battlefield, and you don't negotiate over body armor. That's the fundamental divide. This is where everything converges. Europe believes America is overreaching. America believes Europe is underperforming. Greenland believes both sides are pretending the Arctic hasn't already become the next great power arena. And the world is heating up, literally and figuratively. Which brings us to the last part. How the US, Europe, Greenland triangle becomes the opening chapter of the 21st century Arctic order, and what happens when the Allies start preparing for a fight the others refuse to see. Here's the truth every serious analyst knows, but no European minister will say on camera. The Arctic is not a peace zone. It's the next contested battle space. And everyone knows it except the people who say it out loud. Europe keeps calling for cooperation. China calls it an economic corridor. Russia calls it ancestral territory. Greenland calls it opportunity. Only the United States calls it what it actually is, a strategic choke point that determines which superpower wins the 21st century. So let's cut the theatrics. Greenland is no longer about ice, research bases, or mining rights alone. It's about proximity, missile trajectories, satellite architecture, deep water port access, and submarine lanes. In geopolitics, there are chess squares, and then there are king squares. Greenland is a king square. And when king squares are in play, polite diplomacy gets replaced by quiet preparation. So here's the American calculus: prepare early or pay later. America doesn't posture in the Arctic because it wants to flex. It postures because it doesn't want to get surprised. Washington's view is brutally mathematical. Number one, China is moving north, not metaphorically, literally. Icebreakers, dual-use research stations, Arctic Council influence campaigns, green energy investments that conveniently match military choke points. Number 2, Russia is already entrenched. New bases, upgraded radar arrays, Northern Fleet deployments, revived Soviet-era airfields, hypersonic missile positions. Number 3, Europe is hopeful, not prepared. Hope is not a strategy. Icebreakers are. So America looks at the map and says, if we don't secure Greenland now, we'll be fighting over it later. Not with Denmark, not with Europe, with the powers probing every gap. China and Russia. That's the part Europe doesn't want to confront. So what is the European illusion? Tensions won't escalate if we pretend they won't. This is where the tone shifts from strategic to almost dark comedy. Europe keeps insisting the Arctic should remain demilitarized. Meanwhile, Russia has militarized it. China has commercialized it. The US is stabilizing it. And Europe? Europe is holding climate conferences about it. Let me humanize this just a little bit. America feels like the only sober guy at a dinner party where the guests are arguing about dishware while the living room is on fire. US officials are sitting in NATO briefings saying, the Arctic is becoming a conflict zone. European delegates respond with, yes, but can we not call it that? It sounds harsh. This isn't disrespect. This is misalignment. Europe wants tone management. America wants threat mitigation. That craving for softness is why Europe quietly resents America's Arctic footprint, because it forces them to look at reality they built entire political careers pretending doesn't exist. So let's talk about the Greenland factor, the island that can't afford idealism. Greenland isn't delusional. Greenland knows. Russia is getting bolder, China is getting hungrier, Europe is getting softer, America is getting impatient. So Greenland acts with clarity. It accepts American investment. It accepts American defense infrastructure. It accepts American presence. Why? Because Greenland understands physics. It will be defended by whoever can defend it, not whoever gives the nicest speeches. And right now, the only military capable of securing Greenland's skies, ports, data, and coastline is the United States. Europe knows this. Greenland knows this. China knows this. Russia knows this. Only the political class pretends otherwise. And that pretending is reaching its expiration date. So here's the geopolitical tension everyone feels but won't say. The Arctic is drifting toward the same dynamic the Pacific already entered, bipolarity. The US and its allies on one side, China and Russia on the other. Europe is trying to stand in the middle, but in geopolitics, the middle is not a position. It's a phase you pass through before you choose a side. And Greenland knows exactly which side it's choosing. Not because America is perfect, not because Washington never miscalculates, but because the alternative is instability. The US-Europe-Greenland triangle isn't breaking, it's realigning. Policymakers describe this as friction. It's not friction, it's recalibration. Europe is realizing its influence is shrinking in regions where only hard power matters. America is realizing its patience is shrinking with allies who want veto power without muscle. Greenland is realizing its future depends on aligning with a nation capable of protecting it, not merely advising it. And here's the truth that ties the entire 4 sections I just spoke about up above, breaking it down. Greenland is the future of Western deterrence. Europe is the past. Greenland is the future of Western deterrence. Europe is the past of Western assumption. And America is the present of Western responsibility. One acts, one analyzes, one hesitates. The Arctic doesn't reward hesitation. So here's my question. Why does this matter to the average American? Because everything we're talking about, the tension, the quiet conflict, the strategic chess, determines whether your kids grow up in a world shaped by America, or shaped by the powers America spent a century keeping at bay. Greenland is not some icy island. It is the shield above North America, the radar that sees hypersonic missiles coming, the gatekeeper of Arctic sea lanes, the listening post for Russian subs, the barrier between China's ambitions and the Northern Hemisphere's vulnerabilities. You cannot lose Greenland. You cannot neglect Greenland. And you absolutely cannot outsource Greenland. Not if you want stability, not if you want deterrence, not if you want the West to remain more than a nostalgia project. If this breakdown sharpened you, do one thing that actually moves the needle. Hit like. It tells the algorithm this kind of depth still matters. Drop a comment down below. Even one line boosts this more to everyone out there, and I read every single one. Then subscribe. For rapid, real-time intel, follow me on TikTok, the Watchman 98. This is where you're going to get daily geopolitical hits under 60 seconds. For long-form frameworks, mindset, and the full picture, I have the Watchman 98 podcast now on Spotify. No fluff, no spin, just clarity. Sentinels don't wait for chaos to knock. They fortify the door early. As always, stay aware, stay vigilant, and continue to stand watch.